On Sunday, June 9th, 1912, the Moore family spent what seemed like an ordinary day in the small town of Villisca, Iowa. Josiah and Sarah Moore were well-respected members of the community, and their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were lively and well-liked. That morning, the family attended services at the Villisca Presbyterian Church, where a special children's program was held. Afterward, the Moore girls, Catherine and her friend Lena Stillinger, 12, along with Lena's younger sister Ina, 8, played together. The Stillinger girls lived on a farm outside town, and Sarah Moore kindly invited them to stay overnight rather than make the long trip home. The family returned home around 9:30 p.m., as neighbors later recalled seeing them arrive. The children likely went to bed soon after, with the 2 Stillinger girls sharing a room with Catherine. Josiah and Sarah retired to their own bedroom, unaware that an intruder may have already been hiding inside the house, or would soon enter. The night passed quietly, with no screams or disturbances reported. By the next morning, however, the entire family and their 2 young guests would be found brutally murdered in their beds, marking the beginning of one of the most horrifying unsolved crimes in American history. The quiet town of Villisca slept soundly on the night of June 9th, 1912, unaware that a killer was moving through the darkness. Sometime after the Moore family and their 2 young guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, had gone to bed, an intruder entered their home. Either by forcing a window, slipping through an unlocked door, or possibly hiding inside the house before the family returned from church. The killer moved silently through the small 2-story house, armed with Josiah Moore's own axe. The murders were methodical and brutal. The first victims were Josiah, 43, and Sarah Moore, 39, attacked as they slept in their downstairs bedroom. The force of the blows crushed their skulls, and neither had a chance to fight back. Upstairs, the children lay unaware of what had happened below. The killer climbed the steps and entered the rooms where the 6 children slept. The 2 Stillinger girls, Lena, 12, and Ina, 8, were in one room with Catherine Moore, 10. In another room, the Moore boy Sal Herman, 11, Boyd, 7, and Paul, 5, slept peacefully. One by one, the killer struck them all with the axe, delivering such savage blows that some of their faces were nearly unrecognizable. After the slaughter, the killer took eerie, deliberate steps that deepened the mystery. Some of the victims' faces were covered with cloth, as if the murderer sought to spare himself the sight of their lifeless eyes. A kerosene lamp, its chimney removed, was left on a dresser in one of the children's rooms, its flickering light illuminating the horror. Downstairs, the killer washed his hands in the kitchen, leaving behind a pan of bloody water. A slab of bacon sat on the stove, suggesting he may have paused to eat. Perhaps most unsettling of all, a small hand mirror had been covered with a piece of cloth, as if the murderer could not bear to see his own reflection. Before slipping back into the night, the killer carefully closed all the curtains and doors, sealing the house in darkness. The bodies would not be discovered until the next morning, when neighbors grew concerned about the uncharacteristic silence from the Moore home. The scene left behind was one of unimaginable violence, yet with strange, almost ritualistic details that have fueled speculation for over a century. Was the killer a deranged stranger, a vengeful local, a traveling murderer who struck elsewhere? To this day, no one knows for certain who entered the Moore house that night, or why. The morning of June 10th, 1912, dawned with an eerie stillness over Villisca. As the sun climbed higher, Neighbors began noticing unusual signs from the Moore household. No morning smoke from the chimney, the chickens unfed and restless in their coop, and an unsettling quiet where normally the sounds of children's laughter would already fill the air. By mid-morning, concern had grown into alarm, and a small group gathered outside the ominously silent home. Mary Peckham, a neighbor who often helped Sarah Moore with household chores, steeled herself to investigate. Her knocks echoed unanswered through the still house. When the door swung open at her touch, she was met with a heavy silence broken only by the persistent ticking of the mantel clock. The air carried a faint metallic tang that made her pause as she moved through the downstairs rooms. The master bedroom door, normally open during daylight hours, stood firmly closed. With trembling hands, Mary pushed open the bedroom door. Her screams shattered the morning calm as she stumbled backward at the horrific sight before her. Josiah and Sarah Moore lay in their bed, their heads brutally crushed, the bedding dark with dried blood. The killer had taken the macabre step of covering their faces with bedclothes, as if granting some grotesque final mercy. Mary's cries brought Ross Moore, Josiah's brother, and other neighbors rushing to the scene. What they discovered upstairs would haunt them for the rest of their days. In the children's bedrooms, a scene of unimaginable violence awaited. The Moore boys, Herman, Boyd, and little Paul, lay slaughtered in their beds, their small bodies bearing the same savage wounds. Across the hall, Catherine Moore and the visiting Stillinger sisters met the same fate, their blood splattered in terrible arcs across walls and ceiling. The sheer brutality of the scene overwhelmed the first witnesses. Some neighbors collapsed in shock, while others ran from the house, their shouts of alarm spreading through the terrified town. Dr. Ewing Cooper arrived to examine the carnage, his professional demeanor shaken by what he encountered. The killer had wielded the blunt side of Josiah's own axe with such force that fragments of bone and brain matter were embedded in the walls. Yet amidst the horror were strange, almost ceremonial touches, the careful covering of victims' faces, a single kerosene lamp left burning with its chimney removed, and a hand mirror deliberately draped with cloth, as if the murderer couldn't bear to see their own reflection in the aftermath. By noon, the entire town had descended into panic. Sheriff Hank Horton arrived to find a crowd of horrified citizens gathered around the Moore property, their faces pale with shock. The once charming family home now stood as a silent witness to unspeakable violence, its cheerful white clapboard walls concealing a nightmare within. As investigators began their work, one terrible truth became clear. The killer had moved through the house with methodical precision, leaving behind not a single definitive clue to their identity, only questions that would echo through the decades. The investigation into the Villisca Axe Murders unfolded like a haunting Midwestern Gothic tale, with false leads and lingering suspicions that would torment the small town for generations. Sheriff Hank Horton, whose previous experience involved little more than breaking up drunken brawls, found himself thrust into a nightmare investigation that quickly spiraled beyond his capabilities. Within days, the case attracted national attention, drawing detectives from the Burns Agency and Pinkertons who clashed with local authorities, their competing theories muddying the waters further. The crime scene itself yielded frustratingly few clues. The killer's axe wiped clean, muddy boot prints leading nowhere, and that eerie covered mirror that seemed to mock investigators with its symbolic gesture. As weeks turned to months, the list of suspects grew more bizarre and unsettling. Reverend Lynn George Jacqueline Kelly emerged as the most compelling figure, an itinerant preacher whose erratic behavior and sudden departure from Villisca raised eyebrows. His strange sermon about unforgivable sins, delivered just days after the murders, sent chills through the congregation. When finally tracked down years later, Kelly would offer a chilling confession full of grotesque details only the killer could know, then just as suddenly recant, leaving prosecutors with a maddening puzzle. His subsequent trials became spectacles that divided the town, with some convinced of his guilt and others seeing him as a convenient scapegoat for authorities desperate to solve the case. Other suspects drifted in and out of focus like shadows in the Iowa cornfields. Frank Jones, the powerful local businessman locked in a bitter feud with Josiah Moore, hired his own detectives to muddy the investigation while quietly being scrutinized himself. The specter of William Blackie Mansfield haunted the case, a violent drifter whose alleged deathbed confession to his wife would surface years too late to verify. Even the Stillinger girl's own father faced suspicion briefly, until his rock-solid alibi forced investigators to look elsewhere. The most heartbreaking lead involved a local man named Andrew Sawyer, whose suicide note contained cryptic references that some interpreted as a guilty conscience, though others saw only the ravings of a disturbed mind. As decades passed, the investigation became a graveyard of lost evidence and missed opportunities. Crucial witness statements disappeared from police files. The original axe vanished from evidence. Potential suspects died taking their secrets to the grave. What remained was a tapestry of contradictions, the work of a meticulous killer who left no fingerprints yet apparently paused to eat bacon in the Moore kitchen, who covered victims' faces in a gesture that could be interpreted as remorse or ritual. Modern forensic techniques applied to surviving evidence proved inconclusive, leaving the case forever suspended between fact and folklore, its resolution as elusive as the killer who vanished into the Iowa night. The Villisca Axe Murders left a wound that never fully healed in the quiet Iowa town. In the immediate aftermath, neighbors nailed their windows shut and slept with loaded shotguns, jumping at every creak of their floorboards. The Moore house stood as a haunted monument for years, its peeling paint and sagging porch telling a story no one wanted to remember yet couldn't forget. Children took wide paths around the property, whispering ghost stories about the Moores' curse, while their parents exchanged nervous glances whenever a stranger passed through town. The murders became Villisca's dark inheritance, passing from generation to generation like some terrible family secret. As the decades rolled on, the tragedy took on new life in American folklore. Paranormal investigators began flocking to the house in the 1990s, drawn by reports of phantom footsteps and children's laughter echoing in empty rooms. The current owners lean into the macabre legacy, offering overnight stays for thrill seekers who want to test their nerve against whatever still lingers in those walls. Scholars and true crime authors continue picking at the case like a scab that won't heal, each new theory more outlandish than the last, from serial killer connections to occult rituals. The victims' graves in Villisca Cemetery became pilgrimage sites, their weathered headstones often adorned with fresh flowers and small toys left by visitors who never knew them, yet still feel their loss. What began as a local tragedy has grown into something far larger, a cultural touchstone representing all the unsolved mysteries that haunt the American psyche. The murders feature in college criminology courses and horror anthologies alike, their staying power a testament to our endless fascination with the darkness that can hide behind white picket fences. Modern forensic teams still occasionally take up the case, their advanced DNA techniques offering fleeting hope of resolution before hitting the same dead ends as their predecessors. For Villisca, the Axe Murders became both curse and strange blessing, putting the town on maps it never wanted to be on, drawing visitors who come to gawk at tragedy, yet leave with unexpected reverence. The 8 victims, frozen in time, remain forever the bright-eyed children and upstanding parents they were that June night in 1912, while the shadow of their killer continues to stretch across the decades, as long and dark as an Iowa winter evening. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next one. Bye for now.